The big question in rugby followers' minds, in the last 6 months or so at least, has been whether the Currie Cup still has a place in South African rugby. And the standard of the competition seems to have deteriorated over the last few years, with Springboks hardly ever taking part in the tournament since South African teams moved to the Northern Hemisphere back in 2021. Now, to chat about this and the general player welfare burning issue, I'm now joined by Rugby Writer Brenden Nel. Brenden, thank you so much for making time for us here on the AM Report. And, of course, a good place to start before we head into the player welfare conversation is what we're looking forward to this weekend. Two South African sides already having qualified for European competition, with the Sharks and the Bulls expected to be in action. But the big talking points on the Bulls side, at the very least, Jake White and the flights. What did you make of that? Was he justified? And, of course, you've seen the response from SA Rugby since then as well.
Yeah, we have, and good morning to you guys. Look, Jake is definitely justified in bringing it up. It's something that professional sport shouldn't be happening. But I also understand the other side of the story with SA Rugby as well, because the other game was only finished at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and to find 40 business class flights for a Tuesday on a Sunday night is also quite difficult, as anybody who's booked flights will know. So, yeah, there are still things that need to be sorted out in the European Cup and the Champions Cup. But Jake if he doesn't raise it, it's never going to get solved.
And how does this get resolved then going forward? Because 4 million rand later and a couple of inconveniences, 8 flights and so on, one would want to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, just on the 4 million, I mean, if Munster had beaten Northampton, then they would have come to South Africa, then SA Rugby would have had to pay the 4 million for them. So that's part and parcel of the cost of the tournament. I think the bigger question, though, is a global season needs to be sorted out. Yeah. We've had these talks for years. Players can't carry on playing 12 months a year. And that's part of the problem. If you have the scheduling done properly, where there are places for each of these tournaments, and then the travel can be planned properly. But at the moment, it's literally from week to week.
And what has changed, Brenden? Because from about 1996 to 2001 at least, we did see alignment when it was the Southern Hemisphere teams, Australia and New Zealand playing, and the calendars somewhat aligned. And now with the move to the North, that has been somewhat of a challenge. And others perhaps saying SA Rugby is selling out to the North. What are your thoughts on this, and how do we get that alignment of calendars right now?
Look, I think anybody in rugby knows we had to probably move to Europe for SA Rugby survival. That's where the money is in rugby, and that's where financially you're going to get security. The problem is the European season works from June to June, and the Southern Hemisphere season works from January to December. And at the moment, we're still playing in the Rugby Championship, which is from July to October. So there's no real break for players, where there used to be a December, January where they could go off with their families, have a bit of a mental and physical break, and then come back in January, end of January, and start training again. We're now playing games over Christmas. We're now playing games over New Year. There's no time for these players to have a break, and that's part of the big problem. We need to move one of the tournaments, and of course, Rugby Championship doesn't want to move. Six Nations doesn't want to move. So there we have this impasse between the North and the South.
And that's what I want to zone in on, because there is a real impasse. My players in SA Rugby really not finding each other in terms of their alignment. What is the current situation with the Currie Cup? Because it's not just a theoretical conversation. There are real practical impacts, and one of them, the possible exclusion of the Currie Cup from the calendar altogether.
That is, although I'd say that'd probably be the very last scenario, because that would probably bankrupt a lot of unions in South Africa and do havoc to our playing stocks in this country. I think you can understand both sides. SA Rugby feel the Currie Cup is the oldest provincial competition in the world. It needs to find a place, and it's a lifeblood for smaller teams especially. But on the other side, you understand my players' point, where players do have to have a rest. There has to be an 8-week rest, and where they actually have a physical and mental break from the game. Otherwise, we're going to have burnout in a year or two, and not just on provincial level, on Springbok level as well. So they need to find each other somehow. I'm not sure what the answer is with the current calendar, but somehow they're going to have to find a way of protecting both.
Is there a player welfare concern then? And do you think that SA Rugby is taking it seriously enough? Because we've heard from the unions, and you've also just mentioned the impact of this calendar on the players. Should this be a stronger concern from SA Rugby, and should they take a stronger stance on it?
Well, I think it's a concern from everybody. And I think, while everybody's got a good point there, you've got to find a way to accommodate both sides.
Yeah.
And the competitions are the lifeblood of SA Rugby. They bring in the money to SA Rugby, and without money there is no game. That's professional sport, unfortunately for you. But without players, there is no game either. So at the moment, we've got a situation where the Springbok players are out of the URC from July to October, so teams play with weekend teams. And now we're trying to fit in a Currie Cup at the same time as that. And you ask yourself, where do players get this break? And I think my players are right. There has to be some sort of break, but somewhere in the middle, there's got to be middle ground between these two sides.
Well, at the moment, certainly not finding that middle ground. We hope that situation is going to change as things go on between the two parties. But thank you so much for your time, Brenden, and for joining us right here on the AM Report.